Welcome, everyone, back to the Music Lounge, our favorite music podcast. Perry, how's it going today?
Fine, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Excellent, excellent. We've had some big guests on our show before, but you may recognize his face. His voice is distinctive. He was a massive highlight of my time at MTV and MTV2 and VH1 for a little bit as well. So
Yeah.
who are we talking to today?
Yeah, well, this is our first on-air talent that
It
we've
is,
had. So
yeah.
we're very lucky to get him. Today we are talking to Jim Shearer, who is a former MTV and VH1 VJ and is currently the Director of Communications for Fox Rehabilitations. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Now,
Welcome.
do you know the only reason I'm here is because of Lou Smith?
I was going to shout him out. Thank you, Lou.
I felt like a charity case.
No.
So Lou used his promotional skills
You're
for
a
the
hard man
betterment
to get hold of. You know, we had to find an angle.
Because he's like, Jim, you should be on this podcast. And I said, well, if they want me on, I'll be on. He's like, no, I'm going to email them. I'll let them know that you should be on. So thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Lou. He had a great episode as well.
Yeah,
you
Lou.
guys live in the same town, right? And
is Lou in New Jersey?
Yeah.
I'm in Washington Heights.
Oh, but you just stayed in touch a little bit?
Yeah, we stayed in touch. I was on the Music Talk channel, Sirius XM Volume, and Lou listened a lot to that. So if I would say something on the air, Lou would either email me or text me and say, oh, like that was cool that you talked about that.
Gotcha.
I'll just make one quick note. I like the hat.
Thank you.
You have to watch the YouTube podcast to get the visuals. We're not going to tell anyone what it is. You have to tune in,
Absolutely.
But it's a very cool hat.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. So let's jump right into it. We know you from your time at MTV2, but I don't think that was your first introduction into the MTV ecosystem. How did you get into the company, and then how did you get onto MTV2? And was music always your passion?
Music was definitely my passion. And I was obsessed with the Beastie Boys. So every day I would come home from school, I would turn on MTV. And it was spring of 1992. I turned on MTV, and it was mid-video. And it was these three guys jumping around the woods in sock caps and Adidas sneakers. And I was mesmerized. And I said, who are they? Like, this is it. These are my people. And, at the end of the video, the graphic would come up on the lower third of the screen, and it said, Beastie Boys, so what you want? And from that point on, I wanted to either work in music or be a Beastie Boy.
You wanted to contribute.
Yeah. So it was my senior year of high school. Our economics teacher went around the classroom and he said, what do you want to do when you get out of school? And I was in the corner of the room, so I had some time to think about it. And it was the first time that I thought about what I wanted to do as a career. And I thought, I don't know. And I did announce basketball and football games for the high school television station. And I thought, yeah, like that would be cool, but I want to do something in music. I'm like, wait a second. If I'm an MTV VJ, I could meet all of my favorite artists, and maybe there's a possibility I could meet the Beastie Boys. So it was in high school when I determined that I was going to be an MTV VJ.
Did you meet the Beastie Boys, or have you?
So in 2003, I was scheduled to interview them at the Field Day Festival. Do you remember that? So Long Island was trying to do their version of Coachella.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called Field Day. It was going to be 2 days of music. And then leading up to the festival, they couldn't secure a contract, or the person who owned the land said you couldn't do it here anymore. So they moved the festival to Giant Stadium. So it was no longer going to be a 2-day festival. It was going to be a 1-day festival. And when they moved it up to that Saturday, that was the day that my brother was getting married in North Carolina. So it's like, no, like I was supposed to meet the Beastie Boys. But the story does have a happy ending, because in 2004, the Beastie Boys put out their brand new album, To the Five Boroughs, and I got to interview them 3 times during that album cycle.
Sick.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So just one quick note. In early 90s, was wanting to be a VJ on MTV the same as kids today wanting to be a YouTuber or an influencer?
I think so. Right? Kids want to be an influencer, and I wanted to be a VJ.
Yeah.
Were you
It was the coolest thing you could be, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
you went to college, right? Did you
So yeah, I went to Waynesburg College. I
Right.
was a college radio DJ for 4 years.
I was going to get to that, yeah.
I started my own music video countdown show. So as I was on the path, I was doing things to become a VJ. And then I graduated from college, couldn't find any work. I actually went to want to be a VJ too. And I made it to the second level where, because everyone would do their audition. And then they said, all right, you go back here. And then I got to audition for Odd Asa. And that's the farthest that I made it there. So I didn't get to be a VJ in MTV2. Ray Munns won the title then.
Yep.
But I think I had the last laugh because I was a VJ longer than Ray Munns was.
Much longer. Absolutely.
You were denied the first time around.
Denied the first time. And then in graduate school, I thought, hey, let me get an internship at MTV. So I got an internship in the programming department. Which I found out, Andrew, that you worked in that same programming department.
I did. I got there 2002, so we missed each other, but you were always talked about and they loved you, so I think you did a good job. And it was right next to the music team, which was good for my career growth and probably helped you meet everyone that you needed to. I know Rod Asa was always coming up to that.
Well, Vinny was always on that floor. Yeah. I was right next to Alex Coletti's office.
Yep.
Rachel Mordecai was on that floor. So my internship, I think it was for 2 or 3 days, and I was living on a friend's couch in New Jersey. So I said, since I'm here, like I should intern more. So I did get to manage. I got 2 more days out of the production team with Alex's team.
Nice. Do you remember seeing Rod Asa when you were an intern and you're like, do you remember me? I got to that.
I remember Rod when I started auditioning for MTV2.
Yeah.
But I just remember seeing Vinny a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Our episode with Vinny, launched today or yesterday, I should say. Yeah. Yep. So that's a great one to check out if you haven't already.
Vinny, I listened to the beginning. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. Vinny is Vinny.
Yeah.
Vinny has not changed at all.
No, not at all. Yeah, he's awesome.
And there was nothing else on your horizon because you made that decision in high school and you set the path, planted the seed as an intern. And then there was another opening to audition at that point, or what?
So I changed my dream in the late 90s. Because I was working at McDonald's, and in the break room, they would air MTV2 blocks on MTV. And I thought, the hell with MTV? I'm like, I want to work for MTV2. They're playing music videos. So I remember that I would make homemade audition tapes, and I would just randomly send them to MTV2. I don't know if they ever got there.
Right.
And so then I moved to New York City in 2001. I was an office temp, and every day I would just check out MTV2's website, and I forget when, but they were holding open casting calls for a new VJ. And I thought, well, this is it. Like, I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
And I called the number on the website, and they said, sorry, we're all filled up. And I thought, no, like, it can't be like that. No. So I called the number again, and I got the voicemail, and I think it was someone named Erica. I don't know if I got the name right, but they're like, hey, I'm not here, I'm Erica. So then the next time I called, I asked for Erica. I said, hey, it's Erica. She goes, oh, yeah, this is Erica. And I said, Erica, we set up an audition. When do you want me to come in? And she's like, oh, like, come in Tuesday at 11. I'm like, perfect.
Oh,
so that's how I got my audition.
That's a ballsy move, man, but it paid off.
So that was a nice run for you at both MTV and VH1. I mean, from 2002 to 2014.
So I had 6 years at MTV2, 6 years at VH1.
Wow.
And I remember Vinny telling me, he's like, if you play your cards correctly, you'll get 3 years out of this. And I said, all right, let's do it. I want to get 3 years. So the fact that I got 6 was great. No, actually, no. I got 6 out of MTV2 and 6 out of VH1. So I got 12.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. got my math wrong there.
I actually, I mean, obviously, I watched you when you were on Subterranean on MTV2, but I also used to watch every Saturday morning. I'd watch the video countdown on VH1 when you were there. So it was sort of like my Saturday morning ritual. Wake up a little late, watch some VH1, see what the videos were. Yeah,
I
so
think
it
for
was.
people that watched MTV, MTV2, VH1, knew the VJs, that's almost how you grow up. MTV, a little bit older, MTV2, and then you mature a little bit and you go to VH1, right? So
That's
it
it's
really
interesting you
worked
brought
in
that
your
up because
favor.
Andrew, I
Yeah.
thought that was my trajectory.
Right.
I graduated to VH1, and then my goal was to graduate to Kurt Loder level.
Right.
I'm like, just stay serious about my music,
Yeah.
like stay on top of everything, and then maybe one day I can be the Kurt Loder of either VH1, MTV, or whatever it is at that point.
Yeah, do more of the news or the specials,
Right.
and yeah. Well, I think you
But
had an
it never
amazing run.
happened.
Yeah, it never happened.
Everything we
but-
worked so hard on is gone now.
I
yeah.
know it's sad actually to think about all that stuff.
Yeah.
But you know,
The
that's why
memories
this
live on.
podcast exists, to remind people of how
Yeah.
great it used to be.
Yes,
Exactly.
as Metallica once sang, the memory remains.
You got offered the full-time VJ role at MTV2. Do you remember your first day? What was your first booking? What was a typical day like, or was it just every day's different?
So I was on a trial period. So
Okay.
what they would do is during this audition process, they would bring you in to introduce a block of videos, and then they would put it on air 7:00 in the morning. So if you were terrible, I guess they were hoping that not a lot of people were watching then. So I remember my first video read was for Halloween, and I dressed up in a Halloween costume. And I thought, this is either going to get me brownie points or it's going to kill me. They're like, this is the first we're seeing of this guy. Why is he dressed like a 1970s basketball player? So the first video I ever introduced, Last Night by the Strokes.
Ah.
Wow.
So that'll put you in that time frame. And I remember it wasn't my first shoot, but it was when they were still trying me out and I didn't necessarily have the job. Coldplay was coming in, and it was around Christmas time. And my fiance really liked the Parachutes album.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to have Coldplay sign her the album. And then I remember after, I wasn't even interviewing them. I did my video reads, and then Coldplay came in, and then I popped out the album, and I said, oh, could you sign this? And then I remember a lot of people were like, this kid shouldn't be talking to talent. Like, I don't know. And I thought I might have screwed myself just by getting an autograph from Coldplay, but fortunately I didn't.
Listen, we've had people on the podcast talk about Coldplay and Chris Martin and that whole band. They're just the most chill, relaxed, easygoing guys, so approachable, willing to do anything. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better artist to make that task of, actually.
Well,
So-
Chris was the first artist who remembered my name. Because, you would interview artists and then they would come in again and say, oh, hey, my name's Jim. You may have remembered, like, I interviewed you a couple years ago. But it was at, I think it was at Jones Beach. We were doing a segment with Coldplay. And he's like, oh, hey, Jim, how you doing? I'm like, whoa, like he remembered my name.
That's awesome.
And I think Diane Mayer, when she was on, she said it best, because they were so nice, you wanted to pull for them. You wanted them to become big.
Talking about interviewing artists, and the Beastie Boys and Coldplay, what other artists did you interact with or, do interviews with during your time at MTV2? And were there any stories that you might have that didn't actually get shared on MTV2 about some of the artists that you worked with?
So in 2001, I was an office temp in New York City, making sometimes $10 an hour, but some of those gigs were $8 an hour. Some of them were $6 an hour. So in 2002, I became a full-time VJ. And then that summer, not even a year into it, I got to interview David Bowie.
Wow.
Now, how unfair is that? Because there are seasoned journalists who revere David Bowie, and they would hate me, and they have every right to hate me. So I was 6 or 7 months into this, and I got to interview David freaking Bowie. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Was he everything you expected or not what you expected at all?
So before he came in, his manager said, all right. He's like, David Bowie, when the lights go on, I'm going to open that door and David Bowie's going to come in. You will have exactly 15 minutes to speak with him. When that 15 minutes is up, the interview is over. So I've only been in the business for a few months. I'm like, oh, I was scared out of my mind. And when David Bowie entered the room, he was the nicest guy. And I think because I was so green, David Bowie just really appreciated the interview because there was no pressure. It wasn't like I was going to ask him hardball questions. I was just like this rookie VJ, and I think he appreciated that. And then I remember one of the writers at MTV2, Tom Cisa, who's still there. He's the last man standing.
Wow.
He said, you should ask David Bowie about what he's listening to because he's always ahead of the curve. So the last question I asked him, I said, well, what are you listening to? He's like, I'm listening to this band called Granddaddy. Did you ever hear of them? And I said, at that point in time, I hadn't heard of Granddaddy, although a year later they would end up on Subterranean. And I said, no, I never heard of Granddaddy. He's like, oh, come on, Jim. You've never heard of Granddaddy? And later that day, which is also cool about David Bowie, at the festival, he was eating and catering. Wow. So it's not like David Bowie's off on his own, like getting his own special meal. He was eating with everyone else and catering. And I had my plate, and he came up to me and kind of gave me a playful slap on the cheek. And he's like, oh, Jim, didn't even know who Granddaddy was.
Amazing. That's a great story.
That is a great story.
When you were setting up for these interviews, whether it's emerging or a massive superstar, were you involved in the interview direction and what you wanted to ask?
Earlier in my career, I would team up with a producer, and it was kind of a healthy back and forth. Like, I want to ask this. He's like, well, no, you should really ask this. But later in my career, I would kind of ask whatever I wanted. And now, if someone had input and it was a good question, I would ask that. But if someone just threw in a question that didn't make sense to the story of the interview, then I'd be like, maybe I won't ask that one.
And I'm sure the labels had an agenda as well.
And they would say, don't talk about this or don't talk about that. A memorable one was later in my career, Robin Thicke came in, who rushed out a breakup album. I don't know if you remember that.
Right, yes.
So he had Blurred Lines, big hit, and then he gets divorced with his wife and he puts out a breakup album. And the label said, you can't ask any questions about his relationship. I said, but it's a breakup album. Like, that's the story. Like, if I can't ask about the relationship, there are no questions. So there were times like that where you kind of had to be sneaky in a way where maybe you would ask about the album and have the artist bring up the relationship instead of you bringing up the relationship.
Right. And once they do, it's fair game. Right. And you can follow up on it.
Yeah, it's on them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Was there ever an artist that you got a chance to meet or interview that after talking to them, you became a fan?
Ooh, good question. So just by their personality. You know, I have a good example because there were a lot of people who were nice, and I wasn't necessarily into their music, but I thought, oh, we could be friends. But I remember doing a red carpet at the Grammys, and I had met a young singer-songwriter named Casey Musgraves, who was a country performer. And at that point in time, I didn't know a lot about Casey Musgraves, but she was so genuine and so nice on the red carpet. So I'm like, mental note. So then the next album she put out was Pageant Material.
Yep.
I listened to it and I'm like, boom. I'm a Casey Musgraves fan. But I don't know if I would have listened to Pageant Material if I didn't interview her on the red carpet.
Yeah. Was that the album that was Merry-Go-Round on that album?
Biscuits. Family is Family.
Okay. Yeah.
Good Old Boys Club.
I mean, it's amazing to think of her trajectory also, to go from that to releasing Golden Hour, which won Album of the Year.
Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that she could have actually been, in some ways, maybe a subterranean artist in if you looked at it correctly. I think some of especially the stuff on Golden Hour, I think probably could have been a little bit more like, leaning in that direction.
Yeah, no, I could see that.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was prepping for the red carpet, I forget who the VJ was for the it was CMT, right? Our country
CMT.
music,
Yeah.
CMT. So I went to the VJ at CMT and I said, "Tell me a little bit about Casey Musgraves." And she said she's a great singer-songwriter, but she doesn't necessarily love being in front of the spotlight. So it's funny how she has now embraced the spotlight. But you can kind of see, even when you see her live, you can see that, yeah, like she loves her singer-songwriting, and it takes like a little bit of effort to be out in front.
Right.
You were writing your own questions and steering the conversation how you felt fit. Did you have any influence in what bands you might want to interview, or were you out in the music scene, not as a scout, but, oh, there's this dope band I saw last night and I think we should bring them in, we're playing a video? Did you have any of that influence?
No.
Okay.
I think that's all on your end.
Yeah.
There was a show called Advanced Warning where we would interview up and coming bands.
Right.
And there was a band that I got on there.
Okay.
So that's the most pull I got. And then later in my career, I tugged at Jeremiah, who worked for VH1, and I said, "Luscious Jackson's coming to town. Please book Luscious Jackson on VH1 Big Morning Buzz Live."
Right.
So in all of my years in the business, there was only 2 times where I had any pull.
Right. So I wasn't involved in any bookings, but when 120 Minutes came back, it was basically I was doing the music programming, Matt was the VJ, and Gina Esposito would book. And I would hear like Supergrass or Kasabian is coming into town. So I would really urge us to book certain artists as well that I was personally passionate about, that I feel would have a good run on the channel. Do you feel you had any part in shaping the music culture? Because I think the early 2000s, the mid 2000s was one of my favorite times of music, with early Coldplay and Cage the Elephant and Tame Impala and the Strokes and the White Stripes, a lot of the bands that we really played on MTV2. Did you feel like you were a voice to that new generation?
I guess I felt like a fan, because I was a fan. So I was speaking the language of a fan. So I don't know if I moved any type of needle, but I loved the bands and I wanted them to get even bigger.
I think you have to give yourself credit the way you presented a band to millions of people. It was you, and obviously the visual of the music video, but a lot of that early adoption came from you.
Well, what was important to me was being sincere, because I would hate going to a concert and then a rock VJ would come out on stage who was so disconnected to the audience. Like, "Hey, everyone, we got a great band coming up." And I said, I'm never going to be that.
Right.
So I just wanted to speak the language of a fan.
Well, I think also, too, in the interviews you did with the artists, when you can present a different side of them, or you can bring out their personality, or you can get them to really talk about their influences, I mean, that also gives a fan who's watching more reason to want to listen to this artist or watch their video or buy their music or go to their concert. So in essence, you were really like creating the soundtrack of these people's lives.
So I guess to make a professional wrestling analogy, I played sort of like the manager type figure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would talk the talk, but then the wrestler, aka the music artist, would walk the walk.
Exactly. In a way. This is a part of the podcast where we're going to throw some quick fire questions at you, which we didn't prep you for.
That's fine.
So
are these trivia questions, or these are just quick fire questions?
Maybe 1 or 2 trivia, but pretty much quick fire. So, as quick as you can.
All right. So you don't even want me to think about these. You just want me to spit out an answer.
Spit out an answer.
All right.
First concert.
First concert ever?
Yeah.
Dion.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Where was that?
This was in an auditorium in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So this is Dion of Dion and the Belmonts. He had gone on a run as a Christian artist. My parents only made me listen to Christian music growing up. I wasn't allowed to watch MTV when I was a kid. They won tickets through a radio station, and my first concert was Dion.
So you went just to experience a first concert versus this is an artist that I want to go see.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you just had free tickets.
We had free tickets, yeah.
All right. What's one thing on your bucket list?
One thing on my bucket list in life?
Yeah.
One thing.
I mean, you became a VJ and you met the Beastie Boys, but
Well, my dream after meeting the Beastie Boys, I always wanted. I'm in a band too, but I wanted to be in a band where we played so many shows where at one point I took the show for granted. Where I'm like, I gotta play another show, because I always get excited to play live music. So I wanted to get to a point where I kind of felt jaded.
Don't
That's
ever
a new
get
one.
to that point.
Well, no, that would mean that I probably played like thousands and thousands and thousands of shows.
And
Exactly.
successful and
Right.
Yeah.
All right. One artist you would love to see perform, dead or alive.
I mean, I would love to see the Beastie Boys again.
Okay.
Does that count?
Yeah.
Even though I've seen them 20 times?
Right. From which era?
I would. It's funny you say that, because if I had a time machine, a lot of people may go back and visit George Washington or try to change history. I would go back to 1992 to see the Beastie Boys on the Check Your Head tour.
Okay. Nice.
Which is when you first fell in love with them.
Correct.
Yeah.
And their energy
Absolutely.
was off the charts back then.
Yeah. First album.
First album bought, Rocky IV soundtrack.
That was a great soundtrack. I used to love those. I remember Rocky V was a good one too.
Oh, that had the Elton John song. Now, you said it's a good soundtrack, but can we all agree Rocky V was a terrible movie?
I mean, I loved all Rockies. Good.
Oh
or bad.
no!
Yeah, there isn't a bad one. Yes,
you didn't like Rocky V.
Five,
Home
Balboa.
team. No, Rocky VI. Rocky Balboa was great.
6. 5 was just when he lost everything.
He lost
and went back to the
everything.
hood. Yeah,
And then his son was
Tommy,
mad at him.
Gunn, right?
Tommy Gunn.
Tommy
yeah,
Gunn. That was amazing. I love that one.
the street fight was okay at the end, but
Exactly.
the movie as a whole was terrible.
I don't know. I loved. Guitar solo or drum solo?
Drum solo.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you play in the band apart from sing?
Guitar.
Okay. So is drum something you always wanted to do, but ended up with
I have an
guitar?
electric drum kit that I've been practicing on for over a year.
All right.
So yeah, I would love to
Solo
know
is
all
coming.
instruments. I want to do everything.
All right. Favorite artist right now?
Favorite artist right now, Olivia Rodrigo.
Really?
Yes.
You caught on late?
Caught on late?
No.
Or she...
No, I was there from day one.
Right.
I was
But-
rocking Olivia when she was doing Bizarrevark.
Yeah. So still your favorite artist
Yes.
now? Okay.
Although I do like the band Michigander.
Not familiar. We'll
I don't
check
know
them
them.
out.
Check them out. Check them out.
Okay. What is it about Olivia Rodrigo?
The songs she writes remind me of a song that I would connect with, or a song that I might even write as an 18-year-old.
Interesting.
Because, you know, a breakup when you're 18 is the most devastating thing in the world. So when she put out Sour, those breakup songs took me back to being dumped when I was a teenager.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
And she rocks out too.
She
It's
really
not
does.
like she's like a total pop artist. Like I saw her last year in concert. It was a rock concert.
Yeah, you're right about that.
She's amazingly talented too. I might even consider one of one of my favorites.
Yeah,
at
there
this
we
point.
go. There we go.
I think you turned Perry. Favorite decade of music?
1990s.
Yeah. We're going to end with 2 trivia questions. What day and year did MTV2 officially launch?
Was it August 31st, 1996?
Close. Year was good. October 1st
It was October 1st.
was the day, I believe, it officially launched.
So MTV was that August 31st?
August 1st.
Oh, it was August 1st. Okay.
Yep.
And then I know that Where It's At from Beck was the first video played on
Yes,
MTV2.
You're right about that.
And I got to shout out Lou Stellato, my boss at MTV2. You should get him on the podcast.
We should get Lou.
What was the original name of MTV2?
M2.
Boom.
But I believe there was a lawsuit with another company. The logo was brilliant. It was MTV flipped around with that too, but we had to name it MTV2. Did you know, it's actually in the corner of my room, I can't pull it out right now. I have the first set piece from MTV2, and it's that old M2 logo.
Oh, wow.
And I called, this was years ago. I called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I called the museum in Seattle, and I said, "Do you want this? I'll just give it to you." And no one got back to me.
Wow.
So if you ever hear of anyone who wants the original MTV2 set piece that can do something cool with it, rather than just sitting in the corner of my room, let me know.
All right. I have an MTV2. I think it's got the 2-headed dog on, but it's a mic cube.
Okay.
I have one of those in a box somewhere. Did you have any on-air mishaps or funny moments during a taping?
My most embarrassing moment, and this was when I was a seasoned VJ. So I came back from South by Southwest. Have both of you been to South by Southwest? I'm assuming.
I have not, but I know it's happening at the moment. I'm very jealous.
Perry, it's a lot of work, right?
It was a lot of work. I went when I was working for Vivo, and I don't know if I've been more tired after a work trip than I was coming back from that. It was long days, starting early, ending late. We did a show at an old concrete factory with Kanye West headlining. And it was supposed to start at 10, and he didn't come on until after 1. The show didn't end until 4:30 in the morning. It was insane.
It's a long day.
Yeah, it was definitely the hardest work trip I ever was on.
So Perry just laid out some beautiful context. So I work all week at South by Southwest. I come back to VH1 Big Morning Buzz Live on a Monday morning, and I have to introduce an artist. Now, this isn't an artist that we know of. It's not a household name. It's someone who was on one of those singing competition shows. So we did have a big old prompter in the studio, but I didn't like to read the prompter when I was giving an intro because it felt too staged and rehearsed. So I would just give it off the cuff. So I said, "All right, here he is." And I forgot his name. And I saw the whole crew who had faith in me for so many years, and they're like, "Jim's done. He's glitching." And then I peeked in the teleprompter, and his name had like an accent in it, and I said, Chris Rainey. And he had a look on his face, and then after the show, I apologized to him and his people, but it was live TV, and I forgot the person's name who I was introducing.
It's like John Travolta at the Oscars, right? With Idina Menzel's name.
So how did they cover it up, or you just moved on? And
he sang, and then I put my arm around him at the end, and I said, "Long week at South by Southwest."
Gotcha.
So hopefully some people understood.
Right.
Perry would.
No, it was that we also, the first year I was there, we booked 30 artists to perform, and we had five or six tapings a day. It was just one thing after another, and then you're trying to see shows on top of it too. You're like, this person's playing, that person's playing, there's this party, and you want to go to this and that. I mean, you're just all over the city for 4, 5, 6 days, however long you're there. Yeah, it definitely was exhausting. So but fun. I wouldn't trade the experience either.
No, yeah. So industry question, Perry.
Yeah.
Did you then start to dread South by Southwest?
I only went twice.
Okay.
So the second time I went was a little less busy. We didn't have as many bookings to do, but I was able to see more shows that trip too. So it was a better experience for me. But we did end up, that trip ended with the Kanye performance. So yeah, so that was insane. Yeah.
Yeah. I would dread South by Southwest. And I know it sounds terrible because it was one of the biggest showcases of the year, but I'm like, that's a lot of work.
Were there any challenges that you faced when you started doing the job or even when you were in the job? And what were some of the most rewarding or best aspects of the job for you?
So I'll tell you the best aspect, getting to meet your favorite artists and getting to go to any show you wanted for free.
Yeah.
Shout out to Holly Showman for hooking me up with all those tickets. And when those words come out of my mouth now, it sounds like fantasy. Did we really live that?
Well,
you had good tickets too, right? Like if there was
Good
a VIP
tickets.
pass, you had
Like,
it.
Holly, I want to see the Beastie Boys. Holly, I want to see Green Day. Holly, I want to see the Chemical Brothers. Boom, done. I can't do that today.
No. We've talked about this before too. I mean, I miss having those connections to be able to go see anything that you wanted to see.
And the appreciation of that time was just part of our lives. Now we appreciate looking back, as you're saying, a fantasy, right? But at the time, it was just part of the job.
And then I guess the toughest part of my job was I always wanted to do the artist justice. So I would do my homework for every single interview. But some days you would have 5 or 6 interviews.
Yeah.
South by Southwest days, you would have 15 interviews. And I always wanted to do as much homework as I could. And you wanted to be able to reference songs and albums and different tours. So just trying to keep track of all of that in my head, that was the toughest part of my job.
Yeah, accepting help, which is one of my defaults as well. I'd rather do everything myself. But, if you could clone yourself, that would be the only way I could split my job.
Yeah, and there were times too where I could have had note cards, but I didn't like to hold note cards because it felt kind of like fake.
Yeah.
So I would just try to have everything memorized in my head. So years later, I probably could have benefited from some note cards.
So we talked about, I think MTV2 during the time you were there was really a good time in music history, and MTV2, not really what it is now, but then was riding an important wave. So what do you think the legacy of MTV2 is for that era? And how do you feel about the impact that MTV2 had in music and pop culture in the early 2000s?
So impact-wise, it brought back the spirit of the original MTV, which was so important.
Right.
And then legacy-wise, it gave a platform to artists who weren't initially able to survive in the MTV ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So Fall Out Boy, they later became an MTV band, but they started on MTV2. The Killers, who can sell out any arena or stadium in the world right now, they started on MTV2. And they were so small at one point that they had to share the bill for an MTV $2 bill show. It was them and the Secret Machines. The Black Keys, they had to be on 100 episodes of Subterranean before they cracked the mainstream. Yeah. White Stripes, Strokes, Interpol, Yeah Yeah Yeahs. If your kid is using a Yeah 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 song on a TikTok video, that started on MTV2. So I think that is the legacy of MTV2, giving a platform for acts like that. Mm-hmm.
There's also the look back at those bands and how influential they are also. Like the fact that they, again, started on MTV2, but became like the names and faces of that era. And their music was super influential even today. And the fact that, as you mentioned, kids are using that stuff on TikTok. It's like people are rediscovering it all over again.
Yeah. And I love that Mr. Brightside is the new Sweet Caroline. So MTV2 gives a platform to a band like the White Stripes. So maybe if there was no MTV2, there's no way that MTV in the late 90s, early 2000s is going to play the White Stripes. So MTV2 gives the White Stripes that platform. That song becomes big. And then later, it becomes the sports anthem of the
Iconic.
universe. So
Yeah.
maybe that doesn't
Right.
happen without MTV2.
Well, that kind of answers what our next question was, is what was the impact that MTV2 had on music and pop culture from that time? And you just answered it. Without MTV2, would any of these acts, yes, they would have found a way uh, to be discovered by the audience. However, MTV2 was the one place where all of them could exist and be discovered by the audience.
Yeah. Also, what's interesting, we have another format of our podcast where we go through the TRL countdown, looking at bands that were on the countdown or went to the number one spot. You've got bands like POD, you've got Korn. It's interesting that those bands made it in the early 2000s on MTV, but the supporting artists that we love, that I think may have been a bit more mainstream, weren't, right? So that's just the thought. No comment needed, but you know, it's an interesting thought that why wasn't the White Stripes crossed over and supported? It was eventually.
Yeah. Eventually. Yeah.
But to have
Absolutely.
Korn on the countdown, 99, 2000, 2001, it was interesting. On the TRL countdown with Britney and NSYNC and Mandy Moore. Then you had Korn on the same countdown.
Was there a band that MTV2 got behind that you thought, if we're not the ones sort of exposing and promoting this band, that they're probably not going to get famous or get well known or get their music listened to?
All of the bands you mentioned before.
Well,
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
but
meeting the Black Keys, I never thought that the Black Keys would headline a festival in front of 90,000 people.
Right.
And then the Killers were so awkward. I thought, well, these are nice guys. I didn't think the Killers would become the Killers.
Yeah.
But like a band, just like, I guess bands like that. Black Keys, yeah. And as I'm naming, well, the Killers became big, but a lot of these bands aren't like the bands from the 90s or 80s that exploded. But I don't know if that necessarily exists anymore. I guess maybe it does, because you've got Lady Gaga, who's still big. So, yeah, I always felt like working for MTV, and this is no diss, it was almost like a minor leagues of sorts. And I liked being in the minor leagues. Yeah.
Interesting fact about the Black Keys. They were on Warner. Warner was one of my labels because apart from a music programmer, we were label liaisons, is what we called them upstairs. And me and Yomi Desalu, who was programming MTVU, MTV2, Sucker Free programming, we created a franchise called Road to Release, where we documented with label help the process of a band launching an album, from what was the artwork, how did you pick the songs, some of the time in the studio, and then going on your kind of release promo tour. So it was over a 2-week span, and we got the Black Keys for one of those. The first band we got, I think, was J. Cole. We got Wale, and then the Black Keys. And then they ended up as an MTV Push artist. I don't know what the time frame was, but they were one band that a few of us got behind, and we had that not necessarily power, but we had the influence to support a band that was a label priority. We were passionate about them, and we have to make choices where we select artists for certain support, right? So they were one that I think we got behind after all that time that you played them on Subterranean, and we were like, they now deserve it,
And also, talking about being in sort of the minor leagues, we kind of felt that way on the digital side too. But what it gave us was the freedom to do more of what we wanted to do and expose the artists that we wanted to expose, and to, you know, create an environment that was broader than what you would find on the typical MTV TRL and or any of the other programming that was happening on MTV at the time. And I'm sure you felt that way at MTV2.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, being the little brother, you get more leeway because the parents aren't watching as much.
Exactly. You know, the bad part is that you're kind of, you know, not necessarily seen as a bigger part of what the network is, which sometimes you want to feel like you are. But I would never trade the years that I spent in digital, because I worked with so many artists that I never would have worked with if I was just part of the MTV music team. We're getting to the end here. So this is probably going to be a really hard question for you to answer. What is your favorite NYC concert venue, past or present? And what was the best show you ever saw there?
All right, got to give an honorable mention shout out to Madison Square Garden, just because it's convenient to get to. King's Theater in Brooklyn, not convenient to get to, at least for me in Washington Heights. I have to take a couple days off of work to make it to King's Theater in Brooklyn. I loved, so can I give two? One that's no longer around, one that still is.
Yep.
I loved Roseland.
Yep. A lot of people
does.
say that. Yep.
Because it was 3 blocks from my office, so it was always easy to go to a concert, and I liked the shape of it. Because when I was living in Pittsburgh as a teenager, I envisioned a concert venue in New York City looking like that, a long rectangle with an upper deck.
Mm-hmm.
And we would tape many episodes of Subterranean in the basement of Roseland.
Ugh, that basement was...
But it fit the Subterranean vibe, right?
Right.
I remember I only was in the basement a couple of times, because we did the Woodies there a few times too. But I remember going to the basement, and it was like a 5 o'clock show for 30 Seconds to Mars. It was before they really broke. And then we went into the basement to do a meet and greet with them. And I was like, this place is disgusting. And, you know, it's Jared Leto and his brother and a few other people. And like hardly anybody was even at the show. It was, yeah. I was like, this is not a nice place.
So R.I.P. Roseland.
Yep.
And then my favorite place, and I can't think of a better concert venue in New York City, Tennis Stadium in Forest Hills.
Really?
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. And I used to live I actually didn't live far from the tennis stadium. And then I moved, and then they started having concerts there. And I said, oh, like, why didn't you do that when I lived there? And 2 summers ago, I saw Weezer on their indie summer tour. The set list was brilliant. And prior to the show, my friend couldn't come, so I was by myself. And I like watching a concert with friends. So I recruited some friends, and we had like a nice 15-person concert bubble, and we just went nuts the entire show. It was beautiful.
It's a great venue. Obviously, when the weather cooperates. I saw Mumford and Sons there.
I did too, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen them there.
I don't know, it was a little while ago.
Right.
But yeah. So,
yeah.
One of your favorite shows then?
The Weezer show,
okay.
yeah.
Weezer, yeah. That's incredible.
No Beastie Boys in there?
I never saw the Beastie Boys at the tennis stadium in Forest Hills.
But any show with the Beastie Boys?
I mean, the coolest show I saw the Beastie Boys is that they were playing a tune-up show for, I think, the VH1 Hip Hop Honors, and they did the Maritime Hotel. So there couldn't have been more than 500 people there, if that.
Yeah, that wasn't a big space at all.
Nice.
Yeah. I saw their $2 bill show in Vegas.
Yep. I was
which
there
was
too.
Fun. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice. Sometimes a lot of these kind of pop up smaller shows, because they're more intimate, are just incredible. There was one year, I think the day we got Kasabian on MTV2, they were playing some fashion industry, rooftop. There was probably a couple hundred people there, and maybe there was like 50 of us that were just watching. But it was in this massive loft. And just because I was literally in arm's reach, but they weren't on a big stage up, it was on the same level. It was one of my most favorite shows because the sound was amazing and we were just there. But it was a shame, like some people were just walking around. And I was like, this is Kasabian.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Do you know what we have here? Come on, guys.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. It went quick.
Yeah, thank you. And before we go, I want to shout out my late, great makeup artist, Sherry Lunn, who passed away in December of 2023. She was the ultimate character. She got me through many of my shoots because, you know, in our business, it's hurry up and wait. So just having conversations and making me laugh for all those years. She was with me on my second ever shoot on MTV2, and she was with me with my last shoot on VH1. So she passed away from cancer. She would have been awesome. She would have been awesome to have on your podcast because her stories are 100 times better than mine. And thank you for doing this podcast because you are interviewing all of my friends from the early 2000s who I fell out of touch with. So in a way, it makes me feel like I'm with them again.
Thank you.
We need to do a welcome to the music lounge meetup, I think.
If you could do a reunion of all the people you had on the podcast, that would be the best day of the year.
Susan does some meetups for MTV reunion.
Yeah, Susan does it with Karen Infantino, and I always see pictures after the fact. I'm never invited. So Susan, invite me to these.
We will let you know the next one. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Jim.
Jim, thank you so much. Very good seeing you, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Barry.
Bye.
All right. Bye.